Welcome to the Flippin Health podcast, where we turn medicine on its head, flip it upside down, shake it all about, and see what comes out. We're going to challenge convention and change medicine for the better.
Hello, I'm Grant Schofield.
And I'm George Henderson.
Welcome to the
Flippin Health podcast. What is Flippin Health exactly?
Well, Flippin Health's a name of pre-cure. Prevention is cure, where we're really trying to shake medicine up, turn it upside down, and shake it all about and see what comes out. I think the real interest is in these lifestyle medicines. I'm not aware of a single disease in human history that's been eradicated or sorted out by curing it after you've already got it. They've been prevented by not getting them.
Yeah, that's about right.
So what I think we're interested here in, George, is challenging the way modern medicine has gone, because in the way we spend our money in health and healthcare, and what that means at the moment, if you look across most developed countries' health systems, well, actually every country's health system, not just the majority of money, but almost exclusively all money is spent on treating sickness. Yes. And that's great if you're sick, right?
Yeah, you need it if you're sick, but it's be cheaper not to get sick in the first place.
Yeah, and so if you look at, it's hard to know what to make of all the economic analyses, but if you look at that, then you see that you probably it's about 4 times the saving for every dollar spent in prevention versus spent trying to fix it after. Yeah. But the sort of ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, the fence at the top of the cliff argument. My argument would be that we're better off not having a cliff in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, billions of dollars go into proving that one drug is marginally superior or even just not inferior to another, that are then used to encourage people to spend billions of dollars on these drugs. Very few of which, some do, but very few of which actually cure the diseases and stop them altogether, the diseases they're meant to treat. And there's got to be a more economic way of doing things, but I suppose investment in that is much more limited.
That's right. The reality is we have a very well-developed sickness system, a very poorly developed health system. Yeah. Flippin Health wants to work in that space, challenge that, and I want to, with you, talk to experts from all over the world and get their view on how we change that. And I'm talking about particularly about what we eat and how we eat it, when we eat it.
Yes.
I'm talking about how we move and the benefits of being physically active.
Yes.
I'm interested in sleeping and how that affects our health. Yeah. And I'm affected about all the other aspects of psychology and the positive aspects of what helps us be well, not just fix us up from being sick.
And the way that we think about these things, how we can use our brains to kind of sort through the massive information that's thrown at us.
Yeah, well, that's a real point, because in the information age, of course, we're not short of information, we're overwhelmed by it. Yeah. And how to make sense of it in terms of research, and we're going to do a lot on that. Yes. How do you know if something's even true in the first place?
Yes, I mean, you could say our health information is probably even more polluted than our rivers are, or the air of a big city is. It's been polluted by vested interests. It's been polluted by confused people. It's been polluted by people with sort of non-health ideologies and so forth. So yes.
So in health and medicine, then money, politics, religion, all play a massive part.
That's right.
And I want to explore those as well.
But that said, what do you see as positives in the modern health system in a country in New Zealand? What is it getting right? Because, we're working with it. We're not trying to destroy it. We're hoping to improve it.
Yeah, so I think there are some medicines that are really useful when applied in the right way.
I would say, for example, antibiotics, Hep C drugs and other, more effective antivirals. These probably do produce cures. I mean, these are things that definitely do produce cures.
Some surgeries, particularly emergency surgeries.
Yes, Care of accident victims is improving all the time.
Dental care when you need it, when you have something gone wrong. Those are good things.
Yes.
Eye care and eye health, those sorts of things. Same with auditory stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, those are all intact. In other words, I think when things go wrong, we're mostly there for you. There's been a massive increase in the effectiveness of various regimes for various cancers, the chemotherapeutics and radiotherapy and those sorts of things.
The immunological side of cancer therapy is
it's massively improving.
Promising, yes.
So now with some of these latest ones, you're looking at melanoma and a completely untreatable disease that there's about a 50% remission rate. So those things are expensive but working well.
Yes.
What's not working well is virtually no investment in helping people be more active and having a society that moves rather than sits around.
Yes.
Yeah. A complete confusion in research and public health messaging and food industry involvement in nutrition.
Yes.
And all the subtleties of how that plays out and the research that goes into that. And in my opinion, no discussion, particularly about sleep.
Yeah.
And it seems that some of the pointy ends of that, where that's going utterly wrong, is mental health.
Yes.
The diabetes and associated diseases.
Right. So these are things like mental health and diabetes are not, I suppose, not direct killers, but they are definitely going to worsen your life and shorten your life, and probably shorten your life. But they're not, perhaps because they're not the kind of drop dead.
Mostly.
On the spot diseases, mostly. They really don't get the attention they deserve, but they're kind of maybe the canary in the coal mine because they affect so many people.
Yeah, and so that's part of the problem in medicine, isn't it? When you're bleeding out on the street or, present yourself in an ED and you're in an acute condition, obviously a compassionate society is going to do everything it can to keep you alive, but it doesn't have the same attitude to chronic problems.
Right. There's I've got some old 1960s pharmacology text, and it's got some essay in it quoted. And one of the lines is, the more closely a disease resembles an accident, the better the health system can treat it. The better drugs work.
That's a great one. Just say that again for everyone.
The more closely a disease resembles an accident, the more effective medical treatment for it is.
Yeah, and there's human reasons for that and humane reasons for that, but it unfortunately in modern society, we're missing the point. So, George, I think people will be interested about you, because you've got a pretty colourful and interesting background, and you're probably the most published academic without a PhD. And how did that all happen?
How this happened is it's a very complicated story. I don't want to go into it too much, but I was, I am a musician. I was a heavy drug user. I got Hep C. And I'd always been interested in health, and I'd always been interested in all kinds of, quack ideas, because I've always been a hypochondriac. But at some point, I kind of focused that energy on what was actually wrong with me and went to the med school library and looked at some textbooks, and I started to realise, hey, nutrition has a lot to do with the health of the liver, surprise, surprise, and started taking supplements and sort of thinking, and they worked, and I started thinking about why they were working. So
this is just off the street to the medical school library, is it, in Dunedin?
Yes, and just looking
and you can just wander up there at the time and...
You can just wander up there and look at the reference books without even getting them out, just sit down and read them, and some of these books were also in the public library, and I started off with the desktop reference books that doctors use, like the Merck one, and all the different drug companies put out these kind of encyclopedias, or they did before the internet, of and they'd have a little chapter on every part of the body and a little chapter on every common disease and so forth, in case you'd forgotten, to remind you what drugs to give people. And in the liver chapter, there wasn't much about drugs, because there are very few drugs that are actually effective for liver disease. There's no kind of standard of care, equivalent of a statin for a liver disease at all. I mean, now I talk to people in alcohol and drug detox centres, and many of whom I've met have cirrhosis, and no one is being given a drug to try and slow down or reverse their disease.
And so you're particularly interested in liver disease because of hepatitis C?
Yeah, because of hepatitis.
And also drug and alcohol issues?
Yes. And so kind of the long story short is I realised the importance of nutrition. I knew the supplements were working. I found out they were cofactors in reactions and so forth. So I started, what are these reactions? What is going on? So I got some biochemistry textbooks and kind of worked my way through those, and I started to come across, I was buying books on vitamins, and a couple of the books I had were Dr. Atkins' books and Dr. Michael Ead's books, and I was ignoring the low-carb advice because I was underweight, but I was reading these for the stuff about vitamins that were in them, and one day I just realised, hang on, what Dr. Eads is describing here is the reduction of inflammation on a low-carb diet. What Dr. Atkins is describing here is changes in lipoproteins that would be beneficial for someone with Hep C. Maybe I should try this. And I tried it, and it worked, and it kind of replaced the supplements. So I no longer take much in the way of supplements at all. And I slowly just improved my learning.
And your health?
On the internet. And my health, yes. So my health improved markedly. And eventually I got into a trial for the new Hep C drugs, and that cleared the virus away in about 8 weeks, I think the trial was. And at the start of the trial, I had no fat left in my liver. I had ALT and AST were both at 30, which is well within the normal range.
Yep.
Pretty good for someone in my age. And now they're at 15, so they've gotten even better. And I responded really well to the drug. I also had the lowest viral load of anybody in the trial I was in, and I didn't even feel markedly better after getting rid of the virus because I already
So you
felt...
actually have no trace of the virus now, it's gone completely?
Yes, so it's gone completely. So this is a success. This is a cure. And it's about 98% successful, 98% success rate, and you can try again, and even if it doesn't work, you still get a benefit from the treatment. It's pretty light on side effects. So it is one of the big success stories.
Okay, and then how did you become well known around the world for writing about food, nutrition, public policy, epidemiology? How did that all happen?
That's a good question. I started a blog. I started working for you after disputing some of the things that people were saying around, because so if you are like us and you found that your health has improved on a low carbohydrate diet, this is the thing that's worked for you and nothing else did, you start to notice that other people are kind of bagging it all over the place. They're saying, this is going to kill you because of this and this and this. And then you go, well, hang on, you haven't even really thought about this. These are quite spurious or specious kind of arguments that you're coming up with to try and stop people doing this. So
you felt your democratic right to engage in that process.
I felt I know the data they're talking about. It doesn't say that, or maybe it does, but it can be interpreted in a completely different way. And so I just started putting that out there, and I came to your attention, and I suppose my blog got better known, and at some point we started writing academic papers, review articles, and
letters to the editor, responses to
yes.
papers and stuff.
And then with the help of the reviewers, I improved my writing even more, and I got it to a standard where I think it's as good as most of the stuff published in that field.
So what's interesting, because you're the sort of guy who even still does, just thinks, on the way home, I'll just write a letter to the editor of the newspaper or popular magazine, and then the journals are just a natural extension of that.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I mean, I always used to write letters to the editor, which I'd probably cringe if I could read them now. But I always used to write, about a wide range of subjects. I probably wrote a lot of anti-meat letters in my day. I can't remember them, but I'm sure I did. And yes, I've always had that. I mean, it's one of the things I've inherited from my Scottish forebears. I think is that disputative pleasure in just arguing the facts of something. In trying to analyse things and kind of debate them. So,
because in many ways we've met in the centre of exactly the opposite direction. So, what do you make of the not having gone to university and this, lack of formal training, all that sort of blah 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 stuff? Because but yet still having more skill than most in the area.
Well, I mean, I think where I'm lucky is that I've read all my life voraciously books written by people who did go to university and who did not academic, not books that are so cluttered with academic language, but books that had the clarity of thought, books by people that could explain themselves properly and kind of recognise a good argument from a bad one and so forth. So I think just by taking in by osmosis the English language used properly is a logical process.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big help.
And of course, the information's just freely available now. You don't need to go to that mid-school library anymore. You can just get it all online, can't you?
That's right, although I still like to see things in print.
Yeah,
I
right.
still like to look at my textbooks up and down.
Yeah.
Not that I think that they're 100% accurate, but it's just, if someone thought something was worth writing down and printing, it's, that does have a certain cachet for me. Yeah.
So what I find interesting is I came from completely the opposite direction. So I did all these early in my life, undergraduate and masters and PhD degrees.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's hard to imagine anything that I learnt there is useful for what I do now. So that's the great irony of it, isn't it? That having a few degrees on your wall and is the currency of academia and medicine, yet for me, most of that was of no use at all.
So Grant, how did you get into this area and kind of what's the journey? Where have you been? What's the different roles that you've had up to now?
Well, I didn't mean to. I mean, the longest story is that when I was a school kid, I was really into sport. Up until about halfway through high school, for some reason, I did the work that I was told to do and was really into biology and science, and that was about it. Other than that, I really didn't care much. And then I sort of even lost hold of that through the end of that and into early university because I was really into sports and particularly, most New Zealand boys play rugby, so I did that. I wasn't that good, but I got generally beaten up. And then rowing was another sport I was in, and I was quite good at that, and we were to train a lot and not go to school and that sort of thing. And then there was never a job that anyone was going to be able to employ me to do. I couldn't even look after young children or anything like that. There was just nothing that I was going to be able to coherently do in society to add value. So just sort of carried on to university. And my father was an engineer. He said, you should enroll in engineering. That lasted a week. And then it was either a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science. So I thought I'd do science. And so I've sort of milled my way through that. And the only thing I could think to do, because every year I just like, well, no one's going to give me, there's nothing I can do in society that has any value. So I might as well stay here. And then I just chose subjects that I was interested in, which were mainly physiology and psychology. So I just ended up with a degree in that and then carried on to the master's in that. And then I ended up doing again, at just each point, it was like there's no one could actually give me a job here. But in fact, in the end, when I got a scholarship to do a PhD because I was getting good grades again by now, mainly because I wasn't taking any notes. I would sit there and be interested in, and I'd only do stuff that I was interested in. So I'd just listen and then I'd go and read stuff because it was more interesting or not. And so then when you get a PhD scholarship, which I did, I was able to live a bit, and then they need people to tutor. The university model is one of a sort of giant pyramid scheme where they pay the doctoral students very little to teach, but it's still worthwhile, and the professors just swan around doing whatever they do. So I did that. So I ended up completing a PhD, and it's a lot of mathematical modelling and this sort of stuff, which I knew how to do then, I don't now. And it's the same thing. I can't get a job. What am I going to do? So it was constantly a worry to me, and then I ended up with a lecturing position in Australia, where Louise and I moved. That was my first job. She was a school teacher at the time before she eventually ended up getting a PhD in public health. And I was in a psychology department. I was a registered psychologist. I'm a useless psychologist. But I ran into some like-minded colleagues. I was now competing in triathlons pretty much full-time with a job on the side and learning everything that goes with that about physiology and human function, fuel, all of which were much more interesting to me than anything else, and have served me well in what I do now. And that's sort of in the late 90s, early 2000s. There was really a view in public health that inactivity was a major problem in society that was emerging. So that's how I sort of merged into public health. I got into this idea about inactivity, and I worked really hard. And so the first decade and a bit of my career was in that, which I found really interesting. And we were really successful. I moved back to New Zealand, and I moved from being a lecturer to a full professor on the basis of that work really in public health, getting people moving more. I think the problem for me, it wasn't that successful. It doesn't work.
So getting people moving wasn't producing the benefits that you wanted to see, or you just weren't able to get people moving?
Well, it was always couched in diabetes and obesity, and they respond really poorly to that sort of thing. If we really wanted to see benefits for physical activity, I think we should have concentrated on mental health. So then we started concentrating on environmental design and that sort of thing, and then that got quite micro. And there's a connection here I think hopefully people will see, is that there was this whole standing desks in the workplace thing going on, and I don't know, about 2010 or something.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and so we did quite a bit of trial work on that and discovered that you can make a small amount of difference, but actually the inter-person difference was much bigger. So some people just move around a lot spontaneously, even when they've got a normal sitting desk, and others, regardless of what environment you give them, they just slouch around. And you can't really change their mind very easily. And I reckon that was physiological, and I started to think about that in terms of insulin and insulin resistance and signalling around the vagal nerve and all that sort of stuff. I've always been interested in that. And at the same time, we were still testing in our labs endurance athletes who had trouble with the fuel utilisation, so they weren't able to burn fat. And so we started to understand that was implicated there as well. Tim Noakes has started to do his own work around that time as well, and come out, as it were, with the low-carb stuff, which is interesting to us, sort of in similar fields.
But you weren't convinced then, were you?
No, not at all. I mean, it was completely counter. But what happened is I'd been... A couple of things were going on. I'd done all this work, and I had a doctoral student, Katja Siefken, who's a German, who had spent a lot of time in the South Pacific and got all this contacts with the World Health Organization. And the interesting thing there was that she had got us all these ridiculous contracts. You'd get paid on top of your normal job, this is how ridiculous it is, to go to these remote Pacific Islands for a few weeks and do this testing and just sort of figure out what was going on. And the World Health Organization knew that the more rural and outer island they went, the healthier people were, but they were scared that they would start to contract these non-communicable diseases. So you'd go out there with a healthy nutrition guide from the WHO. We can imagine what that's like. And it's just pretty obvious that there's nothing wrong there, and someone like me coming along, I'm telling to eat less fat and more carbohydrates is only going to make things worse. You don't have to be very smart to figure that there's
I mean, I would make the observation here that I think a lot of our problems are actually caused by a risk-averse public health model.
Yeah. So that was going on. And so then I thought, well, I'm just going to, because I've always liked to just try things myself, and if there was an exercise program or anything that was current in that field or anything else, I'd try it. So I have a go at this low-carb diet stuff in particular performance context. And first of all, that problem of inflamed lymph nodes for a decade from my chronic overtraining and poor quality diet was resolved in a couple of weeks, was just astonishing. I moved from being quite overweight to back to my normal racing weight, if you like, if that's what you call it.
And I moved from being underweight to being my normal weight that I've stayed ever since.
So I was going, well, actually there's a homeostasis around being a human that if you treat the body right, it gravitates towards, which I still believe. And so then I started talking to my colleague Karen Zinn. I'd just supervised her PhD thesis in nutrition, and we'd done the traditional, calories in, calories out stuff and blah, blah, blah. Everyone lauded her thesis, wonderful stuff, no changes, which hardly ever happens. But, it's the funniest thing because we look back at that thesis now and regard the work as terrible. And so we just got talking about that. We had a couple of other doctoral students at the time, Katrin Crofts, who now is on our faculty at Precure as PhD qualified pharmacist, and we started getting into this insulin resistance model. And then as soon as we started piping up about it, I was really surprised, because in public health, physical activity and exercise, also some disagreement, and there is the industry, the gym industry and fitness industry is in its own little microcosm. It's not like it's just a bit of disagreement, and then people come to terms with everything. But nutrition, my goodness me, it's another whole world out there. So as soon as we put our head above the parapet and talked about more fat, not less, then we had a situation where
It triggers a lot of different responses in different people.
well, the one that sits in my mind the most is that early on in this process, we'd been making a bit of noise about this, and there was a letter that was undersigned by the Heart Foundation's medical director, the Diabetes New Zealand, most prominent nutrition academics around the country, sort of basically decrying us, very, very upset about it. Yeah, we responded back on blogs and those sorts of things. But you look back on it, it's just hilarious. The claims about fat and carbohydrate and stuff, even by the conventional standards these days, are just ridiculous.
Yeah, they're not really looked at and thought about before they're made. It's a received opinion that's being repeated by people who do have the training and intelligence to check it before they repeat it. Yeah.
And so then this whole hypothesis-driven research that you were taught in fifth form science wasn't happening? No. I read a paper from the 1990s yesterday, and it had our hypothesis was such and such, and it didn't validate our hypothesis. Instead, we found this. And I thought, my God, that really dates this paper that they say that in the abstract. That's still the scientific method as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly.
And so then what happened is that people started going, well, if you're telling people to eat more fat, they're just going to go down to the takeaways and it's going to be pizza and fish and chips and these sorts of things. And so we were inspired to write our What the Fat book. Yeah. And then the subsequent ones have sort of come from that. Now, bizarrely, we're accused of profiteering from that, even though the whole point was to
give people the kind of
that tool to make sure that we can implement
make it safe. Make it safe for them.
And so now then we've really switched our attention to nutrition as well as exercise, fitness, and physical activity, and it's been quite the journey with that. And so the latest thing really is I felt in tertiary education that's changing massively as well. For the reasons that you have been able to benefit from those changes, I think, is that you don't need the mid-school library card anymore to get engaged in the democracy of research. And so, and learning actually, and there's all sorts of random stuff. Like, for example, the current world champion javelin thrower from Kenya has never had a coach. He learned everything he knows about javelin throwing on YouTube.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was reminded that stuck that I was watching my 9-year-old play soccer, and he's in goal. He's really into goalie stuff, and he's directing, I need you on this post, I need this guy out here, and I need these guys here. And I know for a fact he's had no coaching in being a goalie whatsoever. I was like, how did you know that? He goes, YouTube. So there's an entirely different way of learning things.
I mean, if you look at, in the specific area where we're interested in, the health effects of high-fat diets, I think the most important experiments of the last, my living memory have been done by Dave Feldman, who's an engineer, without formal nutrition training.
Yeah, an engineer in Las Vegas just doing his own thing.
Yeah. And these are groundbreaking experiments. They really show new phenomena. Yeah. Here's a new phenomena that no one knew existed. And also here's an analysis of epidemiological biomarker data looking for something that no one bothered to look for before.
Yeah, so he's done all the stuff that normal scientists would have and maybe should have done.
Should have done to test their ideas, yes.
And so that's the great, interesting new thing. And I was always, people go, well, Grant, you're the only person in nutrition in this country who thinks that saturated fat's not a major nutrient of concern. And I was like, well, are you just saying all those other ones are wrong? And I was like, yeah, I think so. Because science isn't a democracy in that way. We don't have a vote, but we have a democratic process that's different of presenting opinions and moving along.
Yes. Yeah, you don't put it to a vote, but you do put it to an experiment.
Yeah, and you can understand those things. So the way things have moved at the moment, then I think back to the tertiary education thing. Like it costs $100,000 for the government and the person to get a 3-year undergraduate degree. If the student had to turn up and pay cash every time they had an interaction with a staff member or the university, they'd just go, "Oh my Lord, this is $3,000 for that lecture, $500 for that bit of marketing." They would just go, "No, that's not worth it." So there's going to be a different model for learning, And
Yes.
so that's Precure is part of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because, there has to be, I'm largely self-taught, but I've had this massive benefit of working alongside people like yourself, Catherine, Karen, and so
Simon.
forth, Simon, who are academically trained. And I do want to say that, educating yourself, when most people do it, it does seem to result in their heads being filled with rubbish. So we need to be careful and say, you can't learn everything on YouTube, and
Yep.
you need some kind of analytical process that will keep you clear of the weeds, and so hence still the need for a solid framework.
Yeah, so and that's what we've been trying to do with Precure, I guess,
Yes.
is trying to construct some of those frameworks and help people do some of that thinking for themselves, but provide some of the ways to interpret evidence and understand where
Yeah.
things are going. Right, so the Flippin Health. We're going to get on in the next few years, I guess, and really challenge this. Where do you think we're going to get to?
Well, I think we'll start off by interviewing people who are kind of on the same page, so we know what they're saying, and then we should probably move into seeing what people who don't agree with us have to say. That's
That's going to be more interesting.
yeah,
I
it's
think
going
we
to be more
need
interesting.
Yeah,
That's going to test the quality of our arguments.
yeah, that's so stand by.
Yeah.
That's where we're going, but we need to get those people to agree.
yes,
so
we
need to get a few runs on the board, so to speak.
Yeah, we want to kind of fill our audience in with where we are and what we've learnt from I guess the people within our echo chamber, and then and then we'll open it up. Yeah, is I think the idea.
All right, Flippin Health.
Flippin Health to Flippin Health. Yeah, that's it. Thanks for listening to the Flippin Health podcast.
And next episode, we're talking to Libby Jenkinson, pharmacist extraordinaire, and a woman who, with her site, ditchthecarbs.com, is changing the way the world eats.
This podcast is brought to you by Precure. Prevention is cure. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe. If you know someone who could benefit, please share it with them. Together, we can change medicine for the better. Change medicine for good.